Okay, in this video I'm going to show you a few things that you might find helpful. It's just kind of based on what I've seen so far. I'm going to create a new project. This should probably be opened up now that we've been working with Visual Basic. I'm going to select that and choose Next. And I'm going to give my project name. When I ask you guys to use last name followed by the project number, that is where I would like that to go, and I'm just going to browse to change this. Oops. And I'm going to select that folder and create. Okay, so over here, I'm going to talk about some things that are causing people problems. I have a solution here, and the solution is Sorrentino 3. That's what I named it when I started my new project. And this guy is called Form 1. For right now, just leave that Form 1. Some of you are changing the name of that, but when you only have one form, Form 1 is, that's a fine name to have. When you have multiple forms, we can discuss changing that. All right, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about some controls for a minute. The first thing is, here's Form 1. Your title bar should never be Form 1, so you want to always come out first, and you want to change this to something more meaningful, so it shouldn't say Form 1 here. And then if we put anything on here, and I'm just going to show you a couple controls, like I'm going to put a text box here. Okay, the first thing that you want to do is come out and you want to change the name. Don't use the defaults. TXT, I don't know, I'll just call this data. You want to use that prefix that was discussed in earlier chapters. And here I'm going to put a button, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the name. Okay, and I want this to say something besides button, so I'm just going to come down here and change its text property. Okay, and then I'm just going to put a label, just so I have some things to look at. Okay, so I'm going to come to the text, and I'm going to change that to LBL text. Okay, so now if I click here, you can see I have my form, I have my button, I have my label, and I have my text. You want all that in place before you start writing any code whatsoever. Now sometimes with your labels, you don't want this really to say label 1 when it runs, but so I can come down to the text and I can take it out. But sometimes when you take the text out, you don't have much of a label left. So I'm going to come in here to my auto size, and I'm going to change it to false. And that's just going to let me, have a label and make the label whatever size I want. I can change the border style if I want. So this way when your program runs, you'll actually see something. So not with the border style so much, but you can just, when you run this, right, you can see now that the label is right here. Okay. Now you don't always have to do that. I'm just kind of giving you some options here. All right, the other thing that I want to talk about is the code. So I'm going to go to View Code, and right now there is no code. All code goes in between the public class Form 1 and the end class. So I'm going to come over here, and if we wanted to, let's say, write some code for this button, if I double click on this, we know that that's going to create our event handler, and this is where the code would go for that button. But what I'm seeing a lot of people doing is maybe clicking on the form, and this creates a form load event, which we'll be talking about in this chapter, or clicking on a text box, and this creates a text change event. You can double click on the label, and that'll create a label click. So if somebody clicks on a label, you can actually put code in here. But what many of you are doing is just ending up with a bunch of, and here I'm just going to say, you know, this would be the code for the button. A bunch of empty event handlers that are not being used for anything. If you accidentally do this, you really should go in here and delete them out of there, because, you know, they're not really doing anything. Just have event handlers in here for the actual code that you're writing. Okay, so these are some of the things I'm seeing. These extra event handlers are going in here. It generates the first line of the event handler and the ending line. You should only be placing code in here. If you create names for each of your controls initially, they will have the right names when you go to write the code. I think some of you were coming in and like you didn't give them good names, and you realize it after the fact, and then you're trying to change a name after the fact. But when you change the name after the fact, it doesn't always change it in the code. So what you should be doing is, first thing, pull out a control, give it a name. Use the prefixes that are discussed. BTN for button, TXT for text boxes, LBL for labels, right? PIC, picture boxes. And those are just some of the things that I'm seeing. The extra event handlers, changing the names of things that you should not be changing the names of. And let me just show you one thing. I'm not going to put any code in here, but let's say I wanted to change the text box. If I type TXT now, I get a drop box of all the text boxes that have been declared in my program. And that's why that prefix is so helpful. Or if I type LBL, I'll get a list of all of the labels, right? And you can just hit the tab key, it'll fill that in, right? You can change a property here. Oops. Right, as you start to type, you know, and here I can put text in here. All right. So those are just some of the things that, you know, make sure that you have changed the title. You should do this stuff all the time. And there's my text now, okay? You should always go in and change the title of the form. You shouldn't be changing the name of this file. And every time you pull a control here out onto the form, you should be, the very first thing you should do is go up and give it an appropriate name. Okay, I hope that clarifies a few things.